we're going to be remaking a classic texture from Quake 2. This shows up in the very first level. It's going to show us how to create our own color texture, how to create these masks here to create these indents, as well as create our roughness and metal textures. And the first thing we're going to do is create our color. We're going to start with a noise texture, and I'm actually using a specialized node for this. And I'm going to bring it up because it's super, super helpful. I would highly suggest you go to the Material Maker website and then the Assets page. You're going to find this custom material. This is a free custom nodes project by Rubber Duck, and it's got tons and tons of very useful nodes. I'm going to recommend that you grab that. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description. Once you open that up, you can find any node in there that you want to use, and then you're going to select it, then go to Tools, and then Add Selected Node to Library. That's going to allow you to use it within any project that you do going forward. We're going to start with the base Rust noise. If you don't grab that project, you can just use any noise. That's fine. It just won't be the exact same look. But if you are working from that, let's bring that in here. We're going to take this output and then we're going to colorize it. So the colorize node takes a grayscale gradient, which is what this noise is, black to white, and it turns that into a gradient of your choosing. So the black can be a darker black. We're kind of going for this look over here. So let's do that. And let's change our whites. In fact, we can take the eyedropper here and pick a point that we like. And there's our gradient. If you want to make this a little bit more contrast, you can add a tones node in between that, connect that in, and then adjust your gray to adjust the color, or you can bring down your white or bring up your black, whatever you'd like to do. Once you're happy with that look, we're going to add this to a blend, and we're going to do this again. We're going to take our Rust noise, Control D to duplicate. We'll re-roll this. You can press the die right there to do a new seed, get a little bit of a different look, and then we're going to take that, and we're going to do this Kuwahara filter. And this is a really cool filter. I love this. It makes everything kind of look like this watercolor. If you go back to these retro textures, they didn't have the same tools that we had. They had to hand paint these things. And that hand painted quality is why those games really look the way they did. We're going to emulate that a little bit by using this kind of filter every now and then. We're going to adjust the size a little bit and increase that so it's a little bit splotchier, as you can see. And if you turn down your uniformity here, you can almost get this brush stroke look. We're going to take that and we're going to colorize it too. We're going to do this technique that I've seen a couple of times. We're going to colorize this and we're going to make this like a hot and cold light. Okay, so when you have a texture like this, the big issue that you can run into is it looks the same and too uniform. It's all one color, and that's not really how things are. And especially if you look at the example texture that we're working with, you've got some oranges in here, you've got some lighter, there's even some blues. We're going to take our colorize. We're going to adjust this gradient. We're going to add 3 points kind of in the middle, just like that. On our low end, we're going to turn this into an orange. Okay, that's going to be our warm color. In the middle, it's going to be white. And on the right, we're going to have blue for our cool. We're going to blend that into the albedo right there. And let's turn this into a hard light. And you can already see what it's doing here. Now, if we do it all the way on, it's going to look blue and orange and white. We want to turn this way down, and even at like 0.1. If we compare that to the one before, that's our brown. And now we've got some blues, we've got some oranges, we've got some purples. It's a much more interesting look. Next, we're going to take that and use the Alter HSV node. Now, a lot of the time, people will try to take a color and multiply it or blend it in there. You can totally do that. I kind of like this technique. So we're going to take this node and we're going to plug in that same Kuwahara filter that we did. We're going to plug it into our hue, our value, and our saturation. So each one of these adjusts the color in a different way. We're going to plug that in. We're going to set our all the way up, and then we can adjust these values to get the look that we want. If we do a little bit of a change on the hue, it's going to adjust what those colors are. It's subtle, for sure. And then we can also do it on the value. Now that's a lot more prominent. For today, let's set the hue to 0.1, value to 0.2, and then there's our comparison. That's the new one. All right, we're going to do the same thing again, except we're going to take a new noise, a plain grunge. Again, this is in that node package that I showed you earlier. We're going to take this plain grunge. Default settings are totally fine, or you can use just a random noise if you want. And we're going to alter the HSV again. We're just going to do the value setting. Zero these out, set that to 0.2, and then adjust our intensity here. And you see how we had those darker browns in the original? I'm kind of happy with that. And again, there's our original. We've added this nice brown gradient. Next, we're going to add some divots, some little chips into this metal. We're going to do that by adding a dirt node, which actually comes with the Material Maker, so you don't need anything special for that one. And we're going to plug this into a tone step. This is going to help us get the darker or the lighter values according to the range that we use. So the value here, just think of a line that's separating from our black. If we go down to right in the middle or so, we kind of just want a few divots in here. So let's do that, and we'll increase the width, be a little bit lower, and then we're going to invert this so that our divots are the darker part. Now we can take our output here, and we're going to blend, and then we're going to take our tone step output and plug it into the first layer. Now, because this is kind of a dark mask, we want to multiply that on top. So we hit multiply, and you can select how dark you want those divots to be. So obviously 0 is nothing. 1 would be all the way. And maybe you want to be right in the middle or so. Again, it's subtle, but now we have these dots. That's it for our base texture. Now we want to create some depth. And we do that by creating a black and white mask that eventually turns into our height map. Now, in the case of the example texture, our height, if you look at it, we've got a little bit of a slope on the edges, and really you can almost see that they've painted in a slope right there. And obviously we have our insets, our holes. Let's create the edges first, and then we'll do the whole part. There's a couple ways you can do this. We can just start with a brick node. We're going to set all of this to 1 row, 1 column. That's going to give us a square. And we want to get rid of our mortar because we want it to go to the very edge. And then we want to adjust our bevel a little bit so it's just not quite as steep. Another way you can do it is just grab a shape, drag that in, and you can turn this into a square 4, and then make the size and adjust your edge width. That's another way you can do it. I like to use a brick in case I want to adjust, do a variation of what I'm working on. But for now, we can totally just do the shape. And in fact, what you can do is you can take a noise and adjust your shape line like that. Pretty cool. In fact, let's keep that. This is kind of interesting. And the issue is, obviously, the original doesn't have this on the top and the bottom. So we're going to take this and we're going to transform. We're going to stretch this out just a little bit. So we'll increase our Y scale, even just like 1.1 should be fine. All right, so now we've gotten rid of the top and the bottom. Another thing that's useful to do is to kind of take these values and add a levels, add a tones node to it, so you can always adjust how dark or how light you want it to be. We might shift this over a little bit to brighten that out, just ever so slightly, just to bring up the blacks a little bit. All right, now let's do our insets right there. So within Material Maker, you can do shapes, but they also have an SDF section, and I love these things. These are amazing, and it's a lot of fun to play with. So the shape we want is this line here, this cylinder capsule. So we're going to grab the SD line, and that gives us this weird, funky looking thing. We can't actually use that yet. We need to add another node, but this shows you the sign distance field. We're going to take that and we're going to do the show node, and that's going to turn that into a black and white gradient map. And here we can adjust a bevel like we wanted to do before. We can make that no bevel or all the way bevel. We do want a slight bevel. In fact, we're going to do like just an ever so slightly, maybe a 0.01, 0.02, but we also need to adjust our line. So we have an AX, AY, BX, BY, just the placements of these points. And we can adjust these to adjust the sign distance field. So our X, we actually want to keep that the same. We're going to adjust our Y, bring that down to 0, adjust the BY, bring that up to 0. And then width you can play with. We kind of want to match what this texture is doing. So let's bring the width down. Another useful tip is to click on the node that you want to see in your preview and then adjust the value over here. And that's pretty good. You can actually bring out the X's a little bit, maybe do like a 3.7. And we're going to take that and plug that into a advanced tiler node. And this is going to allow us to repeat this thing. So we don't need to tile along the X axis. We do along the Y axis, and we'll do it 10 times. You can see now that we have this pattern, just like we have this pattern here. And actually this is offset a little bit. So we can do the same thing here. So we can use our translate Y and just bring it down, which is really halfway, 0.5. And There you go. All right, so now we've got our great pattern. We want to blend this into the pattern that we created earlier. So we're going to take this, we're going to invert it because we want to multiply this into that texture. And we'll take that inversion, we're going to do a blend, and we're going to take this, put it into our layer, multiply, and then you can adjust how strong you want that to be. So this is going to act as our height map. White values are higher than black values, and that creates the height. Again, it's helpful to take this value here and putting it into a tones node so you can adjust it, so you can fine tune it later on. Maybe we want to bring the blacks up and the white down. We kind of want to squeeze this in. And we're going to take this and we're going to derive both our ambient occlusion and our normal map from this. And in fact, we can do both of those things right now. So let's take this value. We're going to look for the HBAO. This is going to give us a ambient occlusion, which you can see right there. And you can plug this directly into the ambient occlusion. And we can also take the tones node and plug it into the normal map node. And this does a bunch of cool calculations and creates a normal map. You can bring this down a little bit. You can adjust the intensity of that right here. I don't know, somewhere around there, maybe 0.75, 74. And we can also plug that into our final normal. There we go. And there's our currently ugly texture because we need to do some work on our albedo, our roughness, and our metallic. The main thing is we have this general height map. We can use this to alter the color that we did earlier. We're going to alter that color in two ways. First, we need to darken our albedo color. Back in our blend, we're going to make another blend, pop that over here, and we go back to the height map that we created, and we're going to drag it all the way up to that blend node, to our first layer. And we're going to change this to multiply and 100%. And there we've knocked out that edges again, and we've also knocked out our insets. Now these don't look very good yet because we need to add the thing that they manually painted way back in the day, and that is the lighting. You see that lighting on the bottom there gives it the depth. If you look at pretty much any of the old retro FPS games, when they were hand painting everything, they usually always had the lighting baked into the texture. We're going to add that, and we can do that by taking our normal map and getting a custom node. Now this node has been extremely useful for me, and I love it. And we're going to do that by getting a custom community node. So in the very bottom of our nodes panel here, we can click the browse community nodes. You click that button and then you're going to have all of these custom nodes that are on the Material Maker website. We are looking for baked lighting. We're going to click OK. So this is going to take a normal input and it's going to create the baked lighting that we need. So let's plug that in and then look at this. We've got our lit bottom, our dark top. This is sort of as if the lighting is coming from straight down. And you can adjust your direction here if you want. Now we're going to take this and we're going to plug it into a blur. You can use the regular blur that comes with Material Maker, but let's do it with just the regular one. So we'll blur it up that resolution. We don't want to blur it to heck. We just want like a little bit of a softer look because these are hard bevels. In fact, I think my bevels are a little bit too big. So the power of iteration. We can go back to our show there. Let's go back to 0.01. That's a little bit better. Perfect. All right, that looks pretty good. Next, we're going to take that blur and we're going to do 2 tone step nodes. One is going to be for our highlights and the other is going to be for the darker portions. And by adjusting our value here, we can select just the highlights like that. Maybe increase our width a little bit to soften that. In fact, I think our direction could be a little bit better, ever so slightly. All right, so we have our tone step. This is for the highlights on the bottom, and then we need the darker portions on the top. So then we can bring our value down, and now we're just gonna grab the darker ones. We probably won't see the darker ones all that much, but the highlights, we definitely will. Increase that width a little bit. Pretty good. I'm going to plug this into the blend we are using for our colors. I'm going to add 2 new layers. One is going to be dodge, and that's going to be for our highlights. And then the other is for multiply for our shadow. So let's get our highlights, plug that into the dodge, get rid of that. And you can already see now that we have this rim lighting happening along the bottom. And in terms of how much you want to add, totally up to you, how light you want it to be. I think, originally it's not super light. Just a subtle look, and then add our shadows, which probably won't do too much, to be honest. Well, there's a little bit in there. Look real close. So that compared to, I'll just drop these back down. In fact, it almost looks like you're adding a normal map to it, right? which you totally could. You don't have to do both. But if you're not going to do that and you're just going to do a retro style, this is what you want to use. So we've got our color ready to go. And if you're just doing a retro style texture, you can stop here, because the only thing left to do is to pixelize this. Right now we're working in, I believe, probably 1K in terms of our texture resolution, which is way too big for a retro texture. So we got to bring this puppy down. Now I've actually created my own custom node for the game that I'm working on, Children of Kronos, because I'm doing retro textures everywhere. And I call it the pixel node. It's not super complicated, just makes it a little bit easier for myself. Let's look at what this actually is. First what you want to do is take the output and then quantize it. This basically reduces the amount of channels. So we'll keep that at 32. You can adjust that as you want. And then we're going to plug in the pixelize node. Now this is not mine. This is the one that comes with Material Maker, and we're going to pixelize this thing. This is currently 16 by 16, which is incredibly tiny. So we need to up this. And I think generally for the area, you're looking at maybe 128 or 64 pixels. And already that is looking much more retro. And we have a couple of things to adjust too. We have levels. Now the levels is going to do the same thing that quantize does. So it's going to reduce the color levels for each of the channels. I like to have 2, just in case you want to quantize twice, give you a certain look. Here we can just keep this at 32. You can adjust that according to your taste. And then we're going to add a dither around 0.5. Now if you add a dither and then you reduce your channels, Balachi, you got a little bit of a dithering effect. In my case, we're going to keep this at 32. We're going to change this to a 128 size. And then we're going to put in a brightness and contrast node just to give you some fine tuning. You can also plug in a levels node if you want to do that, just to adjust it some more. And if you're going for a super retro look, we can plug this into a pallettize. Now the pallettize node is going to take a palette file and adjust all of the colors, sort of like a LUT. And I've got one already set for the Quake 2 palette, and I'll plug this in here just so you can see what it does. Now this texture itself is a 16 by 16 in terms of the colors, and we can plug that in to the palette, and you can see that we've washed this out. And this would be the colors that were available to that game. So that's our original, and then we have the pallettized version of that, and we're already looking pretty close to the original. Awesome. Finally, let's add some metallic and roughness to this too. In fact, let's plug in the original one that's not pixelized. We'll put that in the Albedo. There we go. And let's create the metallic and the roughness. So we're gonna do a kind of a simplified version of this. So the first thing we're gonna add is a blend node, and we're going to start getting a little crowded here. Bring this all down. There we go. All right, so we have our blend node. The first thing we want to put in is just a base color. This is going to be our base gray that we're working with. And we can have that be maybe around, I don't know, 75% gray. That'll be our background. And the first thing we can do is start adding some of these noise textures that we already use for the color, because those are going to layer on top of one another. And that's what's going to make sense. And you have to think about it really in terms of, what are these noises doing? So this one right here, where we use the rise, this might be kind of your rust area. Those rust areas may be rougher. They may not have as much reflection. You start thinking about it like that, you're going to get a good looking material. So let's go back to that noise that we used, and we're going to add it to our first layer right there. And let's multiply this. You can make it as dark or bright as you want. Let's just go all the way. All right, now we've added some rust to this map. We can do the same thing with the other noise texture that we use. We'll add another layer. We can also set that to multiply. We'll bring that down. In fact, let's change these to overlays. I think it's gonna work better with the multiple. All right, so we'll start with our first one. We'll set that to an overlay. You can adjust your values here. We just kind of want to get a good mix of these. I'll add this to another overlay and up that up a little bit. And then we're gonna take another layer and add all of our little divots here. Put in the third layer. This one we can set to multiply because it's just pure black and white, and bold those out. Perfect. So we kind of have a base map. We need to account for all of these insets that we've done. So we need to find that, which is back down here. I'm going to take this and invert it. So we want to flip it so that the things we don't want are white. And then we're going to do a screen. Plug that in and bring that all the way up. And then we want to take this map and we're going to make a new blend, and then we're going to plug in that inversion, multiplying it, and that's going to give us our roughness texture. And when we're talking about roughness, if it's a white, that means it's going to be flat. There's not going to be any reflection. And then the darker you go, the more reflection you get. We can take that and do another tones node just so we can adjust a little bit, and then plug that into the roughness. Now you can see the shine roughness effect and the noise that we've created. And in fact, these that little stuff on the side looks really cool. It's like we welded that on. For the metallic, we want those insets to be black. We don't want those to be metallic. That's going to look a little odd. We're going to take that noise map that we had, we're going to do another blend, and in this case we're going to take the original inset that we had, and by doing that we're making sure that these are going to be 0 no matter what, and all these other values will still be gray. Now we can take that, and you can do another levels. We'll just plug it into our metallic, and there's our final texture. Look at this on a plane. I really like how those edges turned out. I might go back and adjust some of mine, because that was a really cool technique. That's how you can recreate a retro texture in Material Maker. You can even, modernize it and turn it into a full PBR texture. Hopefully some of these techniques are useful in your own materials. If you want more Material Maker tutorials, let me. There's so much that you can do, and it's just a heck of a lot of fun. I'm going to pop this project source files onto my Patreon for paid members. As always, thank you for the support, and keep creating.